My name is John Smith. I work at a company that digitalizes board games. We make software versions of games like Monopoly, Catan, Virus, and various card games, which are originally played on a board. Ever since I was little, I've been fond of board games. We didn't have video games in my house when I was a kid. So, whenever relatives visited or friends came over, we often played games like checkers or card games like poker. I enjoyed that a lot. It was what led me to get a job at a company that blends video games with card games. I come from a liberal arts background, not a science one. So instead of creating games, I work in an administrative role, like sales. My parents were normal working class folks. They placed their hopes and dreams in me, their only son. Thus, they raised me with a lot of care and seriousness. Sometimes, their seriousness meant they were quite strict. One of their rules was no video games and no comics allowed. While I wasn't forbidden from reading comics or playing games at my friends' houses, we never had any video games or comics at home. My parents were a bit old-fashioned, believing that games could damage the brain. They thought comics were corrupting, and that playing games all the time would turn you into a game addict. They had these ideas. Even though I knew several friends who were whizzes at games but still had great grades, and just because someone was good at fighting games didn't mean they were violent. I didn't see any causal relationship there, so I often found myself puzzled by my parents' views. But their beliefs were firm, and no matter how many times I said, "That's not true," they wouldn't be convinced. And then they would say, "John, we're saying this because we care about your future." When they put it that way, I couldn't argue back. I knew they weren't saying these things out of hatred for me, so I wasn't particularly upset. They cared about me in their own way, just with different values. So, I never disliked my strict parents. In fact, I quite liked them. Being an only child, I wasn't sure how to interact with kids my age at first. When I started going to kindergarten, I preferred home and was scared of kindergarten, but my parents never scolded me for that. "You'll have fun once you make friends," my mom would patiently say to me, crying and scared of going to kindergarten. While my parents were generally strict, they rarely yelled or were needlessly angry. My dad was intimidating, though. That was only when I misbehaved or did something I shouldn't. They never scolded me when I was behaving. However, I grew up with the mindset, be good, and my parents will be nice, misbehave, and they'll be scary, leading me to overly worry about being the good child to avoid their displeasure. So, when my parents said, "No games or no comics," I eventually backed down, and even if I wanted to learn karate, if they said, "It's dangerous, you'll get hurt," or "It's like fighting," I would eventually give in, even though I thought it was just their prejudice. To make my parents happy, I focused all my energy on getting good grades and being praised for my test scores, turning into a child who only concentrated on academic achievements. My parents used to say, "Physical education won't be useful in the future, and it doesn't matter if you're good or bad at sports once you become a company employee. Just stay healthy enough. That's all you need from exercise," they would advise. I loved being active and playing with my friends, so I felt sad when they said that. However, I became hooked on chess after my dad bought me a set one day, and I started playing it all the time. This kind of game, like chess, sharpens the mind. A sharp mind leads to a good job with a high salary in the future. My dad said, "Is that what happiness is?" I asked. "Yes. With money, you can have anything," he replied. Looking back, I realize it was a very biased way of educating, but under my parents' somewhat skewed love, I grew up well. I started playing chess with my dad, and as it wasn't enough, I began playing checkers and card games like poker. With friends, I played easier to understand games like checkers and poker, and with my dad or grandfather, I played chess. That's how I grew up with analog games. I also played games like Scrabble with relatives, and sometimes character-themed card games. My parents didn't like them much, saying, "The designs are childish or they look like comic drawings," but when I insisted, saying, "It's popular at school, please," they sometimes agreed to buy them. Video games, which I could only play at my friends' houses, were very interesting. But unlike my friends who could practice at home, I, who could only play at their houses, was naturally worse at games than them. So, my friends would say, "John is not good, so just watch. That's what I usually heard. I used to wonder, if there's a game that makes me think, would my parents buy it for me? Back when I was young, computers were just becoming common, but there wasn't the abundance of information we have today. So, while I might have found brain-teasing puzzle games if I had looked, I was unaware of their existence. And even if my parents knew about them, they never told me. Gradually, I started buying books with puzzles, crosswords, and such. If it was something like that, my parents would sometimes buy it for me when we went shopping together. By the time I was in the upper grades of elementary school, I began to prefer books of word puzzles and quizzes. Some of my friends were not just into games but also started having smartphones. But, as expected, my parents forbade me from getting one. They said it would cut into my study time if I started using social media. It was expensive, and not something I could buy with my allowance. Thus, I gave up on it easily. Growing up this way, without much exposure to technology, I naturally leaned towards the liberal arts when considering my future path in middle school. I thought about going into science, but by then, I had become engrossed in reading. I even started to write my own novels, filling up college notebooks with handwritten stories. I didn't realize until I was an adult that many people try their hand at drawing comics or writing novels, and back then, I thought, maybe I'm a pretty amazing person for being able to write this much in middle school. I fantasized about becoming the youngest genius novelist. My books piled up in stores, and these fantasies went even further. In my imagination, my books became bestsellers, got turned into movies, and I thought about how I would respond in interviews. That was my middle school life, filled with such unfocused daydreams. And then I became a high school student. It was a regular co-ed school, and I chose the liberal arts without hesitation. In my high school, students were divided into liberal arts and science classes, with the science classes having just a few more students than the liberal arts ones. I was surprised when I got to my liberal arts class. Out of 40 students, 30 were girls. Only 10 boys, including me. It was kinda awkward. Up until middle school, I was a quiet, nerdy guy who hardly interacted with girls. I enjoyed talking about the novels I read with other quiet, nerdy guys. So, suddenly being in a class where boys were outnumbered by girls made me feel uneasy. I never expected the gender ratio to be so skewed. Conversely, in the science classes, the ratio was about 30 boys to 10 girls. There were times I thought maybe I should have gone into science, but I had already decided on a future in liberal arts. I was determined to work in sales or administration at a game company. When I mentioned this to my parents, they said, "Isn't sales a tough job if you're not good at talking? Wouldn't you be more suited for desk work, John?" That's what they said. But still, I wanted to work in sales at a game company, to be able to talk with people from various gaming companies. The reason I wanted to work for a game company was because, ever since I was little, I had thought it would be great if there were video games for table games, and it would be great if there were video games that made you think. By the time I got to high school, I had learned that puzzle games and the like had been around for a while, but my admiration for companies that made interesting and intellectually stimulating games hadn't changed. Let's call that company Company A. Company A primarily turned board games and games like Monopoly into video games. I thought if I told my parents I wanted to work in sales at a gaming company, they might understand. That's what I believed. By the way, John, you always say you want to work in sales, but what kind of industry do you want to work in? There are so many types of sales jobs, like in finance or telecommunications. There's really no end to the options. My parents would ask whenever we talked about my career path. I carefully chose my words to avoid opposition. You know, when I was little, I was so happy when Mom and Dad bought me chess and checkers, and then you bought me all sorts of puzzles, right? Yes, and, well, I want to work in sales at Company A, which sells chess and other games as video games. My parents didn't look pleased. What? A video game company? Forget about such a fickle industry. They opposed, as I had expected, but I wasn't discouraged. When I was younger, I held back my desires to avoid being disliked by my parents. But when it comes to employment, I can't just agree with everything they say. But it wasn't worth having a fight akin to cutting my parents off just to have my way. So, I opted to convince them in a way that would make them agree. It was my first real attempt at a sales pitch. I was now selling the idea of working at Company A to my parents. If I failed, I'd humbly accept that I wasn't cut out for sales and would join a stable industry, as they suggested. Sitting at a desk, I spoke with sincerity. The reason I've managed to maintain good grades is because, from a young age, you both taught me the fun of using my brain with games like chess and checkers. Nowadays, kids are moving away from analog and towards digital games, something you both know, right? Yes, we do. So, I believe the area is shifting to digital. I want to sell intellectually stimulating games that children and young people can get passionate about. I think I spent about an hour persuading them. Initially, my parents were not receptive, but eventually, they seemed to be swayed by my enthusiasm and agreed. Finally, I was able to go to college with my parents' approval and got hired at Company A. Since I aspired to be in sales, I was assigned to the sales department right from the start. There, I met someone significant. Mr. Johnson, the GM. Johnson had impressive sales records and was intelligent, having graduated from a prestigious university. He was exceptionally skilled in speaking. He had a knack for choosing pleasing and persuasive words. A kind of talent, I thought. He secured deals one after another with his eloquence. He became a GM at an unusually young age. The president of the company seemed to hold Johnson in high regard, almost always agreeing with what he said. He probably thought it would be troublesome if Johnson was displeased to AMD move to a competitor. In my 3 years since joining the company, I sensed this dynamic. Since the president behaved this way, other employees often acted in ways to stay on Johnson's good side. Being disliked by Johnson could be risky since he had some connection to the president. One might even be driven to resign if cornered by the president and his entourage. With this in mind, everyone seemed to have become yes-men to Johnson. In the midst of all this, I was assigned to Johnson's direct department just as he was promoted to the GM of the sales department. It seemed that I had quickly caught Johnson's eye. This was because I just couldn't stand the thought of being disliked by anyone. I was a typical yes man, unable to say no. As a result, I was always burdened with unreasonable tasks and menial work by Johnson. It was during this time, "Hey, John, you're coming with me for the consultation tomorrow, right?" that he said to me. I was taken aback by his sudden request and could only respond with a yes. "The negotiation tomorrow." "Yay, that's right. Hey, you've printed documents for me several times, haven't you?" I was often tasked with printing documents and other trivial tasks for Johnson, but I never really checked the contents. I mean, it didn't seem right to scrutinize other people's work too closely. If it were someone in my team, sharing work details would be necessary, but my superior's documents might contain confidential information. So, I hadn't looked closely at the contents. "Why are you looking at me like that? You haven't checked the contents of my documents." "No, I haven't." "You're really slow. Tomorrow's deal is worth 20 million. You know the game company Anderson, right? It's a consultation with them. 20 million. Hearing the amount, I was astounded. "Why would you involve me in such an important negotiation?" "Because you're convenient," he replied. Probably he thought I was useful as a yes man and fairly efficient at my job. "Got it. Be at our company's meeting room B at 9 a.m. tomorrow." "Understood." I responded to Johnson and quickly checked the details for tomorrow's negotiation. And the next day, wow, a wide world awaited me. The weather forecast had indeed predicted snow for today, but it had accumulated impressively. I had set my alarm to wake up an hour earlier than usual, thinking it would be bad to be late for the negotiation. I left home an hour earlier than usual, hurrying to catch the bus, walking briskly on the sidewalk in my snow boots. That's when it happened. The screeching sound of brakes, followed by a loud thud. A car had overturned on the road behind where I was walking. Where I lived was a rural mountainous area, with hardly any cars or people around. I hurried to the car. I helped a woman out of the vehicle. Fortunately, the female driver didn't seem to have any major injuries and came out of the car. "Are you okay?" I asked. Then, the woman said, "I'm fine," she said, brushing back her long hair. Seeing her face, my heart skipped a beat. She was incredibly beautiful. At first, I thought she might be a celebrity or a model. But since I didn't recognize her, she must be an ordinary person. Regaining my composure, I spoke to the woman. "It's dangerous here. Let's move away a bit." Fearing a fuel leak from the car, I supported her as we moved away from it. The car had mounted the sidewalk, so a traffic jam seemed unlikely. But the more I looked at her, the more beautiful she seemed. She was about 5'3", with a slender figure and a small face. Her long hair was glossy and well kept. Noticing me staring intently, she looked at me with a puzzled expression. Well, it seems like you're not hurt, but you know, with car accidents, sometimes the pain comes later, so we should probably call an ambulance, and the police too." "I'm so sorry." No, it's okay. The driving conditions are tough with all the snow." I had chains on, but it seems it got stuck. The road appeared uneven, which probably caused her to slip and crash. I made her sit nearby and called the police and an ambulance. Both arrived shortly after. The woman had introduced herself as Anderson. I ended up accompanying Anderson in the ambulance. While Anderson was being questioned by the paramedics and having her blood pressure taken, I made a call to my company. Thinking about the heavy snow and the likely traffic issues causing delays or absences, I waited for someone to answer the phone. "Hello, this is John." "Hi, John. What's up? Sorry to bother you, but I've just helped a driver who slipped off the road. There's no one else to accompany her, so I'm going to stay with her. Could you let them know I'll be a little late? I'm really sorry." "Sure." After hanging up, I reflected on the situation. There was a $20 million deal happening, but my role was minimal, just being an extra body and carrying stuff. I had gone through the documents the night before, but there was no plan for me to present anything. It was a minor role to be called in at the last minute, but accompanying the woman in front of me seemed more critical. Her life could be at stake. So, I waited, ready to assist in any way I could, and then boarded the ambulance with her. "I'm so sorry. It was my carelessness," she apologized. "No, the weather played a part too. Just focus on your health right now," I reassured her with a smile. She seemed very apologetic throughout. I stayed until her checks were completed. It turned out she had recently moved from another state and wasn't familiar with the area. "I don't have many friends here. My parents are still alive but not nearby. So I really appreciate your help." "Thank you. It's nothing. I hope your tests come back clear." "Well, I should be going." I was about to leave when she spoke again. "Could I have one of your business cards?" she asked. Then she added, "Oh, I didn't introduce myself, did I? I'm sorry. My name is Catherine Anderson. I'm self-employed, so I don't have a business card." "Oh, I see. Thank you for letting me know." I took out a business card. "My name is John Smith." "Oh, from Company A." She recognized. "Are you familiar with it?" "That's great to hear." After a brief conversation, I left her hospital room. It was already 1 p.m. The negotiation must have ended by now. I went straight to Johnson's office as soon as I arrived at work. As expected, Johnson was furious. "What is this nonsense? Are you taking your job as a professional lightly?" he blurted out. I apologized wholeheartedly. "I am extremely sorry. Regardless of the circumstances, my absence from the negotiation was a fact. It was inevitable that I would be reprimanded for it. I could have left Anderson there and come to work, but I chose not to. However, I had no regrets about my choice. I didn't want to be so callous as to leave someone who might be injured, but being scolded for taking this job lightly is something I can accept." "You're probably lying about helping the driver of a slipped car, right?" "I know it. You just overslept, and because of the heavy snow, the transport was paralyzed, and you gave up on coming to work, right? You just didn't want to bother, right? You thought you could get away with it by blaming it on a slip accident, which are common in heavy snow, right? You fool. I deeply regret being late. However, the accident was real." "Shut up. Don't lie to me. If you had just admitted to oversleeping or missing the bus due to the snow, I might have considered it. But you made up a ridiculous excuse." "It's not an excuse. Regardless of the snow, I left my house early to not be late for the important negotiation." "Shut up. Liar. You're fired." "Fired?" I was shocked. I had braced myself for a severe reprimand or for not being given significant tasks for a while, but the sudden termination was dizzying. Wait, please. Firing me is too much. Shut up. I've already talked to the head of HR. We're just waiting for the president's approval. I admit my fault for being late, and I truly regret causing any inconvenience. There were others who were late or absent due to the heavy snow. They weren't reprimanded, and I was being singled out because today was the day of the negotiation. I understood that, but being fired seemed excessive. Shut up. Snow or whatever. As a working adult, it's expected to not be late. If heavy snow is expected, it's common sense to make arrangements like staying at a hotel near the office the night before or leaving home an hour earlier in the morning. And what did you do? You just casually show up late. It was a $20 million deal. Do you understand? I trusted you enough to let you get involved. Do you get it? Once you lose trust, it's never coming back. I was completely in the wrong. I deeply regret being late. But to be fired. Shut up. You're fired. Get out. I was declared fired just like that. The next month would be the procedural period leading up to my termination, and I was instructed to use my remaining paid leave during this time. I trudged home, but due to numerous traffic restrictions, the usually 1-hour journey took about 2 hours. Was it really my fault? I was in distress. If I hadn't accompanied her in the ambulance, would I have made it to the meeting on time? No, even if I had headed to the office at that moment, I probably would have been late anyway. If I was going to be late, wasn't it more humane to accompany the injured person in front of me? Or was it unnecessary meddling? Was I nosy? Tears started to flow. What should I have done? Was abandoning her and going to the office the common sense? Did I really make a decision worthy of being fired? But, even though her injuries were minor, she had hurt various parts of her body. There was also the possibility that she had hit her head. Leaving someone like that alone. I couldn't find an answer no matter how much I thought about it. I finally reached home. I didn't feel like changing clothes, eating, or even taking a shower. I just flopped onto my bed. Usually, I'd never lie on the bed without taking a bath first. But at that moment, none of that mattered. And so, I fell asleep, weighed down by a heavy heart. The next morning, I turned on the TV aimlessly. Checking the weather forecast had become a part of my daily routine. But now, I guess there's no need to check anymore. I let out a wry laugh. My throat was parched from sleeping without drinking anything. That's when it happened. Huh. Seeing the face on the TV, I was stunned. There was Catherine Anderson, the beautiful woman I had helped the day before, featured on a morning show. Catherine Anderson, I exclaimed in astonishment. Yes, that was her. Catherine Anderson was the name of a famous, masked female chess player. She stood at the pinnacle of female chess players in the country, but had been famous since her student days. To hide her identity, she played chess wearing a mask. Even though she was no longer a student, she had said that the mask had become a part of her, and she rarely took it off. This Catherine Anderson revealing her face had become a topic on the morning news. But wait. The lady from yesterday introduced herself as Catherine Anderson. I was puzzled. Could it be someone who just looked similar? No, wait, it was a pseudonym. Catherine Anderson was the president of the Anderson Corporation. So, Catherine Anderson must have been a pseudonym, and her real name was Catherine Anderson. I couldn't believe that the beautiful woman I helped yesterday was the famous genius chess player, Catherine Anderson. As I was still in shock, a call came from my company. Expecting it to be about administrative procedures, I answered the call with a heavy heart. Hello. Yes. John. Just come to the office now. What? It was Johnson, the GM. He usually sounded haughty, but he seemed rushed now. Confused, I asked. I thought I was fired. Is this about some paperwork? I was told we'd handle it by mail. Forget that. Your termination is canceled. Just come quickly. Johnson's request was vague and urgent. Reluctantly, I took a shower, got ready, and headed to the office. There, I was astonished. I was directed to the reception room next to the president's office. There, I saw Catherine Anderson. The beautiful woman I had just seen on TV was there. Beside her was the president of Anderson Corporation, Mr. Kenneth Anderson. Help me out here, John. Our company president was practically begging me. I had no idea what was going on, so I demanded an explanation. And this was the story. Yesterday, as a thank you for helping Catherine Anderson, Mr. Kenneth Anderson and Catherine herself visited our company. They learned about my being fired for being late the day before. Mr. Anderson was furious. Without verifying the truth, he condemned the company's decision to unilaterally fire someone based on an assumption as utterly preposterous. What made this situation so bad for our company was that Anderson Corporation, Mr. Anderson's company, was the partner in the $20 million deal. They are involved in chess-related businesses, while our company develops and sells video games of board games. We were supposed to collaborate with Anderson Corporation to develop a new chess game. That was the deal worth $20 million. Angered by the incident, Mr. Anderson was threatening to call off the deal. That's why the president summoned me. That's the situation, John. We're retracting your termination. Could you please appeal to Mr. Anderson on our behalf? Please, John. Johnson pleaded. His attitude completely changed, and the president's ingratiating tone was frustrating. I felt empty, wondering if this was the company I had aspired to join and worked so hard to be a part of. I'm sorry, but I can't pretend yesterday didn't happen. There's nothing I can do. Please handle it yourselves. Excuse me, I said, and left. A voice called out to me as I walked away. John, I'll thank you properly later, okay? I nodded to her and left the company in silence. And so, I became unemployed. Should I have endured and clung to my job? On my way home, I agonized over the stand I had taken. But at that moment, I had simply had enough. I couldn't keep up with a company like that, not for a lifetime of work. Though the road to re-employment might be tough, I wanted to find a company that I could truly be satisfied with. Then, an unknown number called me. I answered. Hello, this is John. It's Anderson. It was Catherine Anderson. What could she want? Thank you for earlier. I'm sorry for what happened. It's my fault you got fired. Her apology over the phone sounded sincere. I could tell that her apology was not just a formality, it was sincere. No, it's not your fault, Anderson. And it's better I found out early how cold that company is. Actually, I was wondering if you'd be my manager until you find your next job. Manager? It might be overstepping, but since I've removed my mask, I have many fans. I'm short-handed and could really use your help. I don't have any experience as a manager. Do you think I can do it? Yes, I trust you. After you helped me without any benefit to yourself, I believe you are someone I can rely on. Many people try to take advantage of me for my fame, so I need someone trustworthy. And that's how I became Catherine Anderson's manager for a while. It was a relief, considering the difficulty of finding a new job. Having been fired, it would be tough to find re-employment, but having manager for the famous chess player Catherine Anderson on my resume added prestige. Perhaps Catherine saw this and offered me the position, foreseeing its value for my future. I never imagined that my being late that day would lead to becoming the manager for the #1 female chess player. It was something beyond my wildest dreams. Entering a world I had never experienced before was nerve-wracking, but I decided to work hard at my own pace, just as I had always done.